what would Thomas Edison think about podcasts?
So that is an interesting question. I think that he would have mixed feelings about them because he was involved in very early sound recording. He creates a technology and then radio comes out. And it's a huge competitor to his technology, but he doesn't see it that way at first. He completely ignores it initially. So that might be his reaction to podcasts. Or he might get in it at the very ground floor and really dominate that world. So it's really hard to see what his reaction would be today, but he has this history of introducing brand new technologies and finding, great ways to roll them out to the world commercially, to monetize them, but then also kind of ignoring it when a competitor will spring up like he did with radio. So it's hard to say what he would think of podcasts. Yeah.
I'd like to think, given his penchant for over 1,000 patents, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
That he probably would have had many podcasts going all at the same time.
That's probably true, yeah. If he was a podcaster, he would have a lot of different pots in the fire, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Welcome to Shellcast, the official podcast of the beaches of Fort Myers and Sanibel. My name is Jackie Parker. I'm your host, and behind the camera is our audio guy, Ray Saracino.
Hello.
And we are here today at Edison Ford Winter Estates, and we're talking to Mike Cosden. He is the Vice President for Interpretation here, and we're so happy to have you spend some time with us, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. We're so glad to have you here with us today.
So we're a little muffled because we are practicing some social distancing. We've got our masks on, so yeah, we're doing our part, and it's great to see Edison Ford leading the way of that.
Yeah, we're doing everything we can to make sure that we're keeping our visitors safe here. So you'll see staff wearing masks, social distancing rules being enforced, and some helpful guidelines on the floor in different places to make sure visitors know where to stand. And we're also making sure that we cap the number of visitors in any given space, like in our museum store and different galleries of the museum.
And you've got 20 acres here, so this is a great place to practice social distancing.
Absolutely. One of the first things we did when we started reopening in sort of in phases was to reopen our riverside and our gardens to allow people out into the fresh air. So as soon as we had a safe plan to do that, that's the first thing we did, and then we phased the opening of the museum and lab and some of the interior structures.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's plenty of air conditioning in there, plenty of wind blowing around.
That's very important, yes.
Edison Ford Winter Estates is really the top attraction in Lee County. It is, we have beaches, but when you want your history and you want to experience something that is really one of a kind, unique to Lee County, this is the place.
Yeah, we're excited and we feel very fortunate to be in that position.
He lived to be about 84 years old, and he bought this land and built the house, and I think it was about 46 years of his life was here, off and on.
Sure. Yeah, so Edison starts coming here in the 1880s. He had actually just lost his first wife. So he's at a kind of a pivotal time in his life. He's already a world famous inventor at this point for the phonograph and telegraph and some other things. He's working on lighting at this point. So he's already very famous, and I think he comes here because of its kind of remoteness, and he really falls in love with the natural landscape here. He calls it his jungle. So that kind of tells you what he sees in this place. I think he sees it as a rural kind of remote place to get away from everything. He loves fishing and boating and shelling and things in the waterways here.
And that's everything we have here.
Exactly, yeah.
Would you say that Edison was the first snowbird?
I would say that, yeah. We tell people that sometimes. He's the original snowbird. He loves the same thing that many of our snowbirds love today. And of course the weather, which I didn't mention, which was also important for his health. He was having some health issues. His doctor said, seek out some sunshine and some warm weather. So he starts coming here regularly with his second wife, Mina Edison. She becomes very involved and civically engaged in the city of Fort Myers and kind of aids in its development towards more of a metropolitan urban area from the rural kind of cowtown that it was when she first arrives. And then the Fords come in 1916, they buy the house next door, and they start wintering here as well. So really, I think the most interesting thing about our site is you've got Thomas Edison and Henry Ford and their two families kind of collaborating and working together. There's not many places in America where you see two real icons of innovation that live right next door to each other and also work next door to each other in our laboratory across the street.
And Henry Ford worked for one of Edison's companies.
That's right,
and
earlier, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that relationship and what maybe made it finally click and they became neighbors?
Sure, yeah, a lot of people don't realize a big age difference between Ford and Edison, a 16-year age difference. So Henry Ford grows up on a small farm outside of Detroit, Michigan, and he starts working as an engineer at one of Thomas Edison's lighting companies in Detroit. And he works his way up, becomes chief engineer. He actually gets an opportunity to meet Edison at a conference for the company, And they talk about, of course, cars, because this is Henry Ford's passion. He loves the idea of creating a gas-powered car. And this is not the first car. Henry Ford did not invent the automobile, just like Edison did not invent the light bulb. But they make some key improvements to it that makes it kind of marketable and palatable to the masses. So Edison loves this idea. He gives Ford some very early encouragement in his career and says, you should strike out on your own. And Ford quits his company. He'll start 3 automobile companies, and then really a couple of decades go by before Ford and Edison kind of reconnect. And it's when Ford has really become an icon at this point, about the World War I era. Ford is very famous. He's a millionaire at this point. He's on his way to becoming one of the wealthiest people in America. And they start coming back together. They go on some camping trips that really cement their friendship with John Burroughs and Harvey Firestone, which is a really interesting story on its own. And then they work together on the last project of Edison's life, this quest to try to find rubber for the United States. This is why the laboratory was built.
Yes. So I want to talk about that first visit down, because Ford and his wife come down, Clara. They come down, and Edison takes them to the Everglades. And so there are photos of them in their linen suits, and they have all of this, baggage and meals and everything, all this camping stuff. But they're in these white, pristine linen suits, and it just seems like not the thing you'd really wear in the Everglades.
Oh yeah, and not to mention no air conditioning.
Mosquitoes
would be rampant at the time. Yeah. There's a poem from the time, a later trip, that one of Edison's sons was able to go on as well. And they write this poem about how they're probably all likely to get a disease, and there's just like waves of mosquitoes every time they open their tent, and it was flooding because it was raining so much. So really difficult conditions to be camping in. Yeah. But Ford came back. Yeah. He liked that, I think. I think he liked a little bit of adversity, and he liked to be able to escape into nature.
No kidding. And earlier you were talking about that that Edison liked that it sort of had a jungle look when he came here. And I was looking at some photos, from back in the day, and it is thick.
Yes.
It is just dense with trees, and they didn't have the caretakers that the Winter Estates has to to take care of everything, but it's really thick.
Yeah, it was really lushly landscaped, even at first when Edison first gets here, but he increases it quite a bit. I mean, he's got native plants, which he keeps here, but he'll add plants from all over the world. I mean, plants from many different continents, plants that are here for research purposes, and then Mina is bringing things in to beautify the property.
Exactly.
And it becomes kind of a test garden for Fort Myers.
Yeah.
They actually will contribute to the City of Palms nickname for Fort Myers, because they'll plant a mile of palms between their house and the downtown area.
Fort Myers wouldn't be City of Palms without the Edisons.
I think that's true, yeah. Yep, I know. It's really interesting the impact they have on our early city and kind of the legacy that they leave behind in Fort Myers. I mean, think of all the places named after Edison today.
Yes. So there's a quote in the back of one of your publications, and it says, and it's attributed to Edison. You know which one I'm going to say probably. There's only one Fort Myers, and 90 million people are going to find out.
Right.
I think he's been proven correct.
He was a booster for the city of Fort Myers, and I think at the time he said that was about the population of the United States. So what he was saying is America is going to discover this place, and they will all be coming here like I am. So I think he was really one of the earliest boosters that really kind of made a big impact on Fort Myers' economic development.
Here we are at the Moonlight Garden, and Mike, what can you tell us about this beautiful little garden?
It is gorgeous. It's one of my favorite spots on the property. I think one of the things that's really interesting about it, though, is it highlights the relationship that the Edisons and the Fords had. The space we're standing in forms the footprint of Edison's original lab here in Fort Myers. When he built his 2 homes, his main house and his guest house, he also built the lab so that he can continue researching while he was, ostensibly vacationing here in sunny Fort Myers. And he did do a lot of research in this lab, but eventually he decided that he wanted to build a lab for rubber research across the street and really replace it. So when he decides that, Ford says, I'd like to move your original lab up to Greenfield Village, which if you've never been, it's a really, really cool place. It's a collection of American buildings that are kind of significant to history. So Edison agrees, but his wife Mina is really tied to the idea of preserving buildings in their original location, which today is a very normal preservation mindset, but at the time was probably a pretty revolutionary idea. Let's not move this thing, let's keep it here. So she doesn't win the battle to keep it here, but she does win the replacement of the lab with a beautiful garden, this Moonlight Garden here, and the office right behind me, so that Edison has a space to tinker in, because he is in his 80s at this time. Mm-hmm. So this garden was designed by one of the first female landscape architects in the U.S., Ellen Biddle Shipman, and today it is just a gorgeous spot where we have small events and gatherings, even small weddings in this space. Really kind of a romantic, really neat little tiny spot that you should not miss if you come here. So you've got a reflecting pool, you've got lots of flowers and blooms that are white. Yeah, and of course today we've got the overhead lighting, so it's a very nice spot to gather at night.
Here at Edison Ford Winter Estates, there are so many beautiful big trees to take some refuge under and get some shade on particularly warm days. Bamboo trees, banyan trees. There are little placards in front of all of the plants and trees. Actually, there's a butterfly camp going on out here today, I think, as a matter of fact. We're here, in the middle of June.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, we take part every year to try and do our part to help monitor the local population.
We're actually right here on the banks of the Caloosahatchee River. This was very important to part of why Edison came here, because there weren't cars that were driving all the way to Fort Myers back in the turn of the 20th century. So much was brought down by boat.
Sure, when Edison first starts coming here, the rail doesn't come all the way to Fort Myers. There are no real roads to speak of. You've got cattle trails and you've got rivers to bring things in by boat. So he actually will bring the building supplies for his homes and his laboratory here by boat and load them on his dock, which was about to a third of the way into the Caloosahatchee River, if you can imagine. A really massive dock that had to reach the deepest point of a very shallow river. And he would load them all the way up here and then drag the supplies up and bring us and build his homes and his laboratory out of those. So he had to import all of his building supplies for his homes.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty interesting.
And there was a pavilion out there too, right?
Yeah, there were several different structures on the pier, but probably the most notable was the pavilion. And we were actually able to rebuild it a few years ago. So it's now rebuilt on land over here.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that is a replica
of the...
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yes, it was very large. Yeah, he had a boathouse and a couple other structures, which just goes to say for how massive and important this dock was to the Edisons.
And it was well lit, I saw in a photo.
It was. There was electric lighting, which reporters and journalists that visited were really impressed by. They talk about the ethereal kind of ghostly glow that it provided on the water. So people were very impressed by the pier, yeah.
So we've wandered over to Seminole Lodge, and this was the home of the Edisons, and I believe Mina Edison named it that?
That's right. Seminole Lodge is really what Mina liked to call the place. Edison would continue to use his jungle to refer to this place. So that shows you the different ways that they thought about it. Mina had this very civilized opinion of what their home represented here in Fort Myers, and Edison was maybe interested in the plants, the foliage, the natural landscape.
Okay, I have two questions about the relationship.
Yeah.
One, they were... it's about 16 years apart.
Right.
So what was her relationship like with Ford? Because they were closer in age. Were they buddies? Did they, hang out or?
Yeah, that's interesting. She really corresponded more with Clara, as you might expect, especially at that time. Mm-hmm. So her and Clara became very fast friends.
Great.
They corresponded a lot through letters, which is really how Mina kept in touch with the people she cared about. In our collection, we have probably thousands of letters that Mina wrote to her friends, family, her loved ones, and a lot between her and Clara. So really that was a more close relationship.
Exactly, and that makes perfect sense. And I read that there was an interesting way that Edison proposed to Mina.
That's right. Edison tells the story that he proposed to her via Morse code, which is really important to his history personally because he was involved in telegraphy, where you would learn Morse code by heart. You had to know it to be able to send and receive messages. He actually names his first two children Dot and Dash after the telegraph symbols, the Morse code symbols rather. So yeah, he tells a story that he proposed to her by tapping out a message in Morse code on her leg or on her knee. So that's kind of interesting. That's the story he tells. We don't know if it's the fact or not, but that's the story that he liked to tell the public and the press about.
To show that he's a hopeless romantic.
That's right, exactly, yeah.
Exactly, well, cool. So tell us a little bit about what we're looking at. We're looking inside, and also, I just want to say, when you come to Edison and Ford Winter Estates, there is hand sanitizer. I'm seeing it everywhere. Right. There are stickers on the ground. What are they? They're not really called stickers. What are they called?
Yeah, decals. I'm not sure what you call them.
That's right. Asking people to say 6 feet apart. So it's just really nice to see that. So
I appreciate it. And then behind the scenes, there's a lot that's going on too. We've changed our hours to accommodate additional cleaning every day, and we've trained staff. Really, all staff are now involved in the cleaning process, as well as our staff that are dedicated to just sanitizing things. So. Cool. It's a whole new world that everyone is adapting to.
But, it is, and it's really great to see this big of a attraction doing that.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, Mike, what are we looking at inside?
So this is Edison's main house. He built a main house for himself, and actually the house next door, which is just a mirror image of it, for his business partner at the time. But this is where Edison would have lived and where he would have honeymooned with Mina when he comes down here in 1886. Initially, it would have looked a little bit different, but over the years, he adapts it to changing kind of architectural styles. So a lot of the things we associate with it today, like the beautiful French doors, allowing lots of natural light and a breeze inside, and the really wide porches, are actually things that he modifies over the years. So originally, this house is in sort of a Queen Anne or Italianate architectural style, but over the years, Edison makes lots of adaptations to it, and this craftsman style comes into vogue, and they say very flowery things like, bring nature indoors, or diminish the boundary between outside and inside. So that's when you start to see things like these windows and doors being expanded out into French doors. And then you've got transom windows around them that actually open at the top to allow additional airflow in. And this all would have been screened at the time. So you can see really they're trying to bring the outdoors inside their home, allow light and natural breeze through.
And the breeze off of the river has just got to be wonderful.
Yeah, well, you see how important it is to us today.
Yes.
on a hot June day here. You can imagine how important it would have been to them.
So I want to talk about visiting for for people who are driving here, people who are locals. There's just so much to see, and I've had friends that come in the morning and they go have lunch in downtown Fort Myers or over at Pincher's right around the way, and then they come back because there's just so much to see. But what do you recommend?
You can definitely spend a whole day here, especially if you've got a family and everyone wants to see different things. What usually we would recommend is people see the riverside first, and we just say that because of our weather cycles here in Fort Myers and Southwest Florida. We're always worried that we're going to get shut down due to lightning or heavy rain. So we always say enjoy the outdoor portion first, and then come back and soak in the air conditioning inside the museum and see the historic lab as well.
Yeah, it's a true reward on a day like today.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So for people visiting, really covers a lot of ground. If you're into history, if you're into plants and nature, if you're into cars.
Right.
It really checks a lot of boxes off of the to-do list for a family.
It does, yeah. And then we've got things that appeal to children as well. We've got exhibits and interactives and things that are specifically designed for them. So I think there's a lot going on here that people can enjoy with the whole family. And like you said, whether you're interested in history, botanical gardens, cars, all those things. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the cars for the gearheads listening?
Sure. We've got a number of cars in our collection. Many of them are antique Fords that we use to demonstrate the different models they created and the different kind of improvements Ford made over the years. But then we've got some what we call historic cars as well. So we have really one of the neatest artifacts in our collection is the car that Henry Ford gifted to Thomas Edison. So it's one of those things like the Moonlight Garden that shows off the collaboration between the two of them. And there's kind of a funny story. Henry Ford wanted to gift Thomas Edison with a Model T, so he instructed his local dealership to do that, but instead they delivered it and then they gave Edison an invoice for it. And of course Edison paid for it, so Ford had to rectify this whole situation and kind of berate the local dealership that messed this up. But it goes on to become one of the most unique Model Ts because it's an early model, but every year Ford would send an engineer to add on improvements to it. So it's got later brakes that were added on. It's got a different starter that was added on later. So it's modified in all these ways, so it's a totally unique vehicle, and it showcases their friendship. So that's a really neat one.
No kidding. So it got upgrades all the time.
Exactly. Edison didn't want a new car every year. He didn't even drive, really. He had a chauffeur, or his kids would drive him around at times. So
The discovery of goldenrod and how that helped to create rubber. And what I guess find interesting about that is that was one of the last things he did.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to me, like you said, this is one of Edison's last projects. Really, it's his last research project before he passes away in 1931. He doesn't really start heavily researching it until the late 1920s. So really, it's the last 4 or 5 years of his life, he's engulfed in this project. He works on it 6 months out of the year here and 6 months out of the year in New Jersey, where he lives the rest of the year. And it's a really important project because the U.S. is really dependent on rubber. Most of it comes from South Asia at the time. It's all natural. There's no synthetic rubber that's commercially available yet. So the U.S. is really dependent. During World War I, we're cut off from our supplies, and it becomes a really critical commodity.
And why do we need rubber?
Well, yeah, so you think about what rubber is used in. It's used obviously by the medical industry for tubing and things, but it's used by the automobile industry. It's heavily used by the military. They're dependent on it to make important new things in World War I, like gas masks are heavily made out of rubber, but also tires for all their troop transports and things. So it's really, we're dependent on it for national security at this point. So Edison realizes this, and he's having these campfire discussions at this time with Firestone and Burroughs and Ford. They're talking about this on their camping trips while World War I is progressing. And in the 1920s, it really starts to become his focus. So he shifts from all these different fields that he's been involved in, electricity, designing cement, all these different things, to botany at the end of his life, which is something he's always been interested in, but it's really his first time, his first professional foray into it, and he gets into that in his 80s. So that's just a really interesting facet of Edison's life that I think people haven't really discovered yet.
Really?
He was great at delving into new fields. I think that was one of his favorite things to do, was exploring a totally new field to him.
What is one of your favorite things here that you would tell visitors to really consider taking in?
I think the most important structure, just historically speaking, is the laboratory. And I think for many years it wasn't really understood well by visitors. And in fact, if you came here a long time ago, if you haven't visited in decades, you might have seen things in there like, I've been told there were phonographs and toaster ovens in there. Well, the lab's been totally reinterpreted based on inventories of what was there at the time, photographs, to show you exactly what happened there, which was exclusively rubber research. So I think that lab is the most historically significant building here, but there are little spots all over the garden, all over the estate rather, that I think are really important for visitors to see, like the Moonlight Garden, which we explored today. There's just little nooks and crannies all over the site that give you a real insight into what it was like to be here when Edison and Ford were here.
And all of the varieties of mangoes.
That's right. Lots of varieties of mangoes on the Ford property especially. Yeah.
The other great thing about this place is you don't have to be from an out-of-towner. I live a few miles away, and we come up there are plant sales. There's plants across the street that people can buy, and they're native plants. The gift shop, the museum, the lab. There are events all the time going on the weekends.
Sure.
And you also have garden talk, and there's just lots of different things going on.
So many different events. We have changing exhibits pretty regularly. At least once a year, we've got something new happening in our museum or our caretakers gallery. And then, of course, you've got the changing exhibit of the gardens, which are blooming. Always something different in bloom on the property. So really, there's something new to see every time you visit.
There truly is. And people have events. People have weddings, special events here. Also, I can't imagine a more beautiful setting.
Yeah, we've done a lot of great, really big-scale corporate events, weddings, private events of all different kinds. So we're really excited to be able to play that role for our community.
Mike, you have specialty tours also?
Yeah, so we talked about all the different things that might bring you to our site, whether you're interested in cars or science or history. One of the ways you can really engage in that is to take a specialty tour. So we do, once a week, we do a tour. You can go inside the houses with our curatorial staff, and they tell you all about preserving them, and you see things sort of behind the scenes you don't normally get to see. We offer a similar version where you go inside the laboratory. We also have an automotive tour led by an automotive expert. It's really interesting. He goes all through the evolution of Ford vehicles, and you see many different cars on site, and it culminates with us actually starting one of the antique cars, which is always really fun.
How popular is that?
It's great. And whether you're on the tour or not, when you hear that car starting, everyone runs over to see that.
Yeah, what's going on? What does that sound?
It's
exactly.
really cool.
Exactly. Yeah, it really is. And I'm not the biggest gearhead, but I've been on tours and I see that and I'm like, what is that? And I always learn something, and I do love being so close to here, just to come down and wander around or take a tour or go buy a plant. It really is a gem in Fort Myers. We're so happy to have it.
Yeah, we're so glad that you appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks. And the tours, taking the tours, you can download the app and take a tour, or there are signs that have a phone number on them.
Yeah, so we've got two options. You can do a self-guided tour, and like you said, you can do that through our app, which you can download. It's great. It has audio, historic photos, all kinds of different facts in it. You can get the very same experience by just calling a phone number on site here, which I think is a great option. The audio quality is awesome. We've got a really nice audio tour. And then you can also take a guided tour. We've got experienced historians that you can interact with, ask questions. They are awesome as well. So we've got a lot of different ways for visitors to kind of see the site.
At the end of the parking lot, there are bees.
That's right. An apiary. Yeah, so bees were a part of the property initially. Edison had bees here. He operated it almost like a small farm. He had a cow, he had chickens. He was really self-sustaining, self-reliant when he first came here especially. So bees have always been an important part of the property. We had an opportunity to actually bring in some bees that would help ensure that there wouldn't be any hostile bee colonies or hives on the site. So we've got these, you might say, peaceful bee colonies that are maintained by our local beekeepers. So they're helping us maintain bee populations and make sure we've got a positive bee experience. And of course, today we all know how important honeybees are for agriculture and for our society. So it's nice to be able to have a kind of a controlled bee population here on site.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to kind of go back to the beginning and talk about Edison, and maybe would he have done a podcast, and I think he would have, and I'd like to think that he would have enjoyed this one.
I hope so, yeah. We talked about all kinds of different topics, and I think he would definitely enjoy that part of it.
Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for being a part of this episode of Shellcast, Mike.
Thank you. We so appreciate you guys visiting with us.
Terrific. Find out more about Edison and Ford Winter Estates in Fort Myers, Florida at edisonfordwinterestates.org. You can look to Edison and Ford sites on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, and YouTube. Thomas Edison would have loved all of these social media options. That's it for this episode of Shellcast. We appreciate you listening to the official podcast of the beaches of Fort Myers and Sanibel. We're located along Florida's Gulf Coast, about 2 hours south of Tampa. Shellcast is available wherever you download fine podcasts and at fortmyers-sanibel.com. You can also find Shellcast on Instagram at Shellcast the Podcast. If you have any questions or a suggestion for an episode of Shellcast, please email us at shellcastthepodcast@gmail.com. Shellcast is produced by the Lee County Visitor and Convention Bureau. Thank you to Ray Saraceno, as always, for your excellent tech, and thanks to our colleague, Courtney Herschel, for the theme music. I'm Jackie Parker. Thank you so much for listening to Shellcast. We'll catch you again next time.